everyone, and welcome to our new week. This week it's our last week for poetry, and we are working on revisions. So I'm asking you to choose two of the poems that you've created so far for this class and to look at the student and teacher feedback on it and your own thoughts on it, and to revise those drafts and to submit the revisions with some comments on what choices you made, what experiments you tried, and what you think about the new drafts. So those instructions are in the unit. And I wanted to kick this off by showing you an example of my own work going from a really early draft, a first draft, to a finished draft. I'm not going to do all the drafts in between, but no, this is not just one leap, but this was sort of after multiple drafts. And the point I want to make here is that the job of an early draft, a first draft, is to be a first draft. It's not to be a finished draft. It's not to be a perfect draft. It's not to be the draft you send out for publication, right? And it rarely is it those things. Once in maybe a great while, but rarely it isn't. I used to write everything down in a notebook. Now I start poems usually on the computer. But when I used to write everything in the notebook, I got curious one day and I had finished a notebook and I wanted to know how many of the pieces I started in that notebook ended up being something that I thought was worth sending out for publication. I was curious. What was the percentage? So I went through and I literally counted each piece. How many pieces did I have? How many did I think that I actually work on enough to perfect to send out for publication? And the percentage was 10%. So 1 out of 10. And if you think about it pessimistically, that's pretty bad number, right? That's pretty bad. That's pretty small percentage, 10%, 1 out of 10. But I actually was pretty excited when I saw this, when I made this calculation, because what I thought to myself was, do you mean I just have to write 10 start 10 things and one of them is going to be worthwhile, one of them is going to be worth sending out, right? So it gave me this idea that, okay, the idea is to generate things, right? Generate a lot of material, and then you work on the things that are most worthwhile, and probably the things that are in between, the things that don't end up being a finished product, might be contributing, right, to the things that you're writing later that are good. So I'm saying all that just to encourage you that, if you don't love everything you've written this term, that's pretty normal. I would say that's on target, right? And so you want to choose a couple things that you think are worth working on, and that's what we're going to do this week. So I'm going to read this first draft, and I'm telling you, this is bad. Like, this is kind of embarrassing, but I'm reading it to make a point. I hope you appreciate me embarrassing myself, but I think it's, you know, this isn't, I wouldn't normally share first draft with people for that very reason. It's not really that worth sharing. But it's the starting point. Without the first draft, you never get to the subsequent drafts, right? So that's why first draft is really a good thing. It's a generative thing. So, okay, so this is the first draft. 3 American pelicans. If you've ever seen them, they do come over Montana. I've seen them. They're white. They're white and they have like a gray or black stripe on their wing, and they have the, pelican beak. So, pelicans. 3 American pelicans stood far out in the lake, in a shallow place, only their feet covered by the water. Clothed in white and wisdom, the first one raised his prodigious beak and said, "The trouble with young people today is that they don't know how to work together. They don't know how to make a plan and follow through." The second bird nodded his horny plate in agreement, while the third arranged himself carefully on the sandbar next to the second and waited for the fish to swim in. So I really had seen these 3 pelicans out in the lake. This is when I lived in Iowa, in Storm Lake, Iowa. And, that was kind of what prompted me to write about this. I think there's some, like, right away, there's some things that stand out to me in this poem that I don't think are working very well. I think the clothed in white and wisdom is pretty, I don't know. I don't really like that. I think it's kind of over the top. And I don't know why. I can't remember back to my state of mind when I was writing this, but prodigious beak. And prodigious means big, large, but I never use the word prodigious in real life, so I don't know why I thought that was a great idea, this first draft. So I definitely wouldn't keep that in a future draft. I think it's kind of interesting that there's Pelicans are speaking. I don't remember why they were commenting on the youth of today. But I don't know, is that the direction I wanted to go, right or not? I'm not sure. The horny plate is an actual part of the pelican. So they have the males, if you ever see them, I can't do it. I don't have a horny plate on my nose, but they have a large beak and it actually has this bump on it. But I think that language is, even though it's precise, I don't know, it's kind of weird and not something that everyone would know. So I don't know how I feel about that. I do like this idea though of there's three of them out there and they're having some kind of confab. They're kind of like checking in with each other. I kind of like that idea. Um, so what happened is I was working on this poem, and I'm not going to read all these drafts, but I'm just going to scroll up to see. This is how I normally work on poems now because I start with typing them. I don't usually start them in a notebook anymore. And then I go up, and so I copy it, paste it, and then I keep just revising it. And you can see I'm revising it, revising, revising. So it's a lot of, sometimes I'll have 20 something drafts. Okay, going. So it's a lot of drafts until I get to the one that I like and I want to send out. So I want to share something else with you. Let me find this. Okay. So as I was in the process of revising this poem, because I thought there was something there that I wanted to work on. It doesn't mean it was perfect. It means that it just had some energy, like something to it, something about these three pelicans I really wanted to keep working on. I saw this call for submission. So this is a journal, an online literary journal called Right Hand Pointing. And they had an update on this issue of their journal they wanted to make called 1 through 16. And so their idea was, hey, we want to get contributions of 16 poems with titles 1, 2, 3 through 16. And the title must somehow fit the content of the poem. So the titles are not just the number of the poem in a sequence. So it's not just this is the first poem, the second poem, this third poem, but there has to be some kind of threeness to the poem three, for example. And I thought, ooh, that's really interesting. Like that might fit with what I'm doing with this. It might be a new way of thinking about this poem about the three pelicans, because there really were three pelicans. And I thought, how could I make this draft that I have more three? It said it has to embody like the threeness. And I was like, that's a cool challenge, right? So this is like a new goal for me to have, right, if you will, as I'm revising this poem. So I'll show you what I ended up with. It was chosen for this issue, which became, I think they ended up calling the issue Imaginary Numbers. So even they revised the title of their of their issue. It was no longer 1 through 16. See if I can make this a little bit bigger. I know it's yellow. So this is 3. So let me read it and then we'll talk about some of the choices that I made. And again, this wasn't one revision. This was after, as I kept working on it, I got to this draft. 3. 3 American pelicans stood far out in shallow water on Storm Lake. White feather next to gray wing, next to orange bill. They didn't complain about the wastefulness of youth. They didn't lament the passing of the year. Without any argument or negotiation, they arranged themselves into a living net and waited together on the sandbar for the fish to come in. So you can see this is clearly did come from, right, that original draft, but it's different. It's a very different poem, and I think a more successful poem, right, than that first draft. So what I did, you might have noticed as I was reading through it, is I thought, okay, three, there's 3 pelicans, and how can I embody 3? So I thought, what if I have 3 words per line, so 3 American pelicans, and then 3 lines per stanza. So these are all 3 words per line, not syllables, but words, and 3 lines per stanza for the whole poem. So it really enacts that threeness in addition to being about 3 of these birds, right? These pelicans. And what that forced me to do in revision was, because now I was going to have a certain length to the line, excuse me, and a certain length to the stanza. So it forced me to kind of tighten it up, right? And often in our first drafts, really there's 2 ways first drafts can go. Either they're too wordy and it can be beneficial to trim them down, or they're too compact. If it's really short, like maybe some things haven't been fully explained or realized, right, or discovered. And I think this one, it was the too wordy, like I had the bird saying all this stuff, right? And stuff like that. So that I think was cool. And then it also, I think it helped me really focus, right, on some of the things. I like how this draft, for example, focuses more on the color. So white feather next to gray wing next to orange bill. There's no prodigious, right? There's none of these kind of highfalutin words that didn't really need to be in there. And then instead of quoting like what they're supposedly saying, it says what they didn't talk about. So they didn't complain about the wastefulness of youth. They didn't lament the passing of the year, all these human things, right, that we might talk about. Instead, they're doing something purposeful. They're fishing for their dinner. And that's what they were doing out there. So together, they work together to kind of corral the fish. So they're out there doing something purposeful and kind of living in the moment. So that kind of ended up being the poem. So I give that example to show like kind of how far the poem can come, once you have an idea for how you're going to go about it, how you're going to revise it. Now, obviously, I'm not suggesting that you take one of your poems and make it 3 words per line, 3 lines per stanza. That was the particular way where I decided to revise this. You have to figure out what's the angle you want to take, right, for revision on your poem. So I'm going to go into the assignment. See, can I find it? Okay, so let me click on the revision assignment here. So as I said, you're going to pick 2 poems to revise. Now, I went through, and because have a lot of experience, right, revising poems and kind of looking at poems, when I look at an early draft, what I'm looking for is what are the treasures in here? What's really cool that the person can focus on, and what's maybe feels extraneous, right? What could maybe be cut and leave the poem? And maybe it even, sometimes some things we cut end up in other poems, right? Or other stories. Sometimes they just don't belong in this poem. So I would say definitely look at my comments, because I've tried to say some really specific ideas or suggestions to you, like, hey, what if the poem started here? Sometimes you don't need the beginning. Or what if it ended here? Or what if you explored this part a little bit more, right, and expanded it? This word combination might be like the prodigious beak, right, in my poem, and it's uh disrupting, right, what's happening in the rest of the poem. So maybe that you want to look at that again. Right. So I've tried to give you those just as I would do for myself, right, as I'm going through this. So definitely look at those. And then I want you to, so make a revision, and I'm not asking for perfection. I'm not asking for a perfect poem, but what I want to see is you actually revised it. So you tried something out. Revision is really about experimenting. Like if took my original poem about the white pelicans and I wasn't willing to change it up, I never would have gotten to that final draft that I like so much better, right? Because I had to cut things and I had to change things and I had to write some new language, right? That was the only way to get there. So what I really want to see is that you're willing to take some risks and you're willing to experiment with a poem. Even if ultimately, like, let's say you look at it and you decide, boy, there's things about this I like, and there's things about this I still really don't like. That's fine. That's a perfectly fine place to be. And I showed you as I scrolled through, right, how I had many, many drafts. It wasn't the next draft. And I know you don't have time in 1 week to maybe do 22 drafts, and that's fine. I'm not worried about that. I'm just worried about you having the experience of changing it up and seeing what happens, having that and knowing that it's okay to change it up. And you'll notice in my when I had all my drafts, like I still have that first draft, or I still have the early draft, right? I don't delete anything. I keep them all in case I want to go back and pick something up that was like, oh, no, I want to go back to that one version of that line. I don't lose anything. So I'm not asking you to delete the version that you turned in. Don't lose it, but copy it and paste it and work on it and change it up, experiment. That's the goal, right? That's the work of being a writer. That's what I'm trying to help you experience this week. So after you do that, I want you to write a paragraph about the poem. You're going to do this for each of your 2 new drafts, talking just briefly about what you did. What did you add? What did you take away? What did you try different with line breaks or stanza breaks? So for some of you, for example, if you didn't really have line breaks, you're definitely going to want to lean into line breaks, right? Um, did you sharpen some imagery or figurative language? Did you work on sound effects? So maybe one of the earlier poems where we hadn't yet talked about sound effects, maybe now you see some opportunities, right? That you just wasn't on your radar, right, when you started there. I want to hear about changes you made and just what you think about them. That's really all I want to know. And in addition to the peer comments and my comments, I also put in here some suggestions for revision by my friend and fellow poet, Sage Cohen. She's an awesome teacher and poet, and she has some specific things. If you need something extra, if you're like, I just haven't quite found the right way of approaching this poem for revision, look at her prompts here. I think she has 13, and they're all different, right? They're all different ways you could go about the poem. I'm just gonna point out one, see if I can find it real quick. Like one's about titles. That's a great idea. So maybe, the title's not doing enough work yet, or you didn't have a title, right? So you could try out three different titles and figure out, what you could do with titles. This one I really like, number 13. If you're really stuck, I think this can be an excellent thing to do. So print out the poem, cut it up into lines, into the lines that you have, and then you can try reordering it, putting it in different stanzas. Like, you can visually mess around with it, right, to see what you can do with it. So that can be a fun thing. And she says, you can rearrange it till you have the aha moment, right, of a perfect fit. Or maybe you see where, yes, I like this rearrangement, and this is where I need to add more, right? Or these lines just are going to go away, right? And I'm going to put them to the side. So that's your challenge for this week. I really hope you have fun and enjoy it. Again, this is creative work, is being willing to, not see the poem as uh, finished in the sense of I can't go back to it. Creative writing is really about rewriting and revision. So that willingness to keep playing with the materials that you've created, that you've generated in the first draft. Um, Thanks so much, everybody. Hope you have a great week, and I look forward to seeing your um, revised poems. And the next week, we're going to jump into fiction, into stories. So I look forward to that too. Thanks, everybody.